Good morning, everybody. We are starting today with Shrimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, Book 11, Discourse 10. So we are in the Uddhava Gita, the last spiritual teachings of Krishna to his best friend, Uddhava. We finished the first part, which are the lessons of the Avadhuta, but there is a lot more Uddhava Gita, so that's probably all we're going to be reading today. The next discourse is entitled The Emptiness of Earthly and Otherworldly Enjoyments Exposed. The Lord said, and so this is in the context of his answer to Uddhava's question of how Uddhava can attain to his state even in his absence, since he has revealed to Uddhava that he is about to end his avatarana and leave the earthly plane. The Lord said, attentive to the righteous duties taught by me and depending upon me and forsaking all desires, man should follow the conduct prescribed for his caste, order, and family. Having thus purified his mind, he should observe how the actions of worldly men attached to sense pleasures, who consider them to be real, produce contrary results to what they desire. As the dreams of a sleeping person and the fancies of one drowned in a reverie are of no value, being of a diversified character, diversified as in constantly changing, of no stable value, so is the notion of differences produced by the gunas illusory. One who is devoted to me should perform all obligatory or occasional duties, but should forsake all actions prompted by desire. If one is fully engaged in an inquiry into the self, he need not attend even to his prescribed duties. My votary should devoutly practice austerities and at times observe sacred vows, and he should wait upon his guru of tranquil mind who has realized me as identical with himself. He should be free from pride, jealousy, sloth, and attachment. He should be firmly devoted to his guru and cool, and a seeker after self-knowledge. He should not be fault-finding or one indulging in useless talk. He should not feel attached to his wife, children, home, lands, relations, and wealth, etc., and should find his purpose equally in all. As a burning fire that shows things is different from the piece of wood that is burnt and illumined, so is the self-manifest soul, the witness of all, distinct from the subtle and gross bodies. Just as a fire burning a piece of wood assumes its qualities of destructibility, coming into being, smallness or magnitude, and variety, so does the soul assume the attributes of the body when it enters it. The subtle as well as the gross body is constituted of the gunas controlled by the Lord, and transmigration of the soul is the result of identifying it with the body. This misapprehension can be dispelled only by the real knowledge of the self. Therefore, through inquiry, one should gradually realize the transcendent and absolute self, permeating the body, etc., and the latter as unreal and different from the self. The guru is the piece of wood underneath, the disciple is the upper one, the piece of wood on top, and the instruction is the middle piece, or the churning rod, and knowledge is the delightful fire produced by friction. The perfectly purified wisdom obtained from an efficient guru dispels Maya, the product of the three gunas, and these gunas too, and ultimately, dispels both Maya and the gunas themselves, and ultimately the intellect itself becomes quiescent, as fire once its fuel is consumed. If you admit the variety of souls, the agents of actions, subject to happiness and misery, if you maintain that the regions, time, the Vedas, and the soul are eternal, and if you hold that all objects, while constantly changing, are eternal, and that the whole sense of perception is engendered by the objects perceived and then changes with the objects, then, O Uddhava, you will have to admit that all souls associated with the body are subject to time and repeatedly to the states of birth and death, etc. Then it is evident from your standpoint the doer of actions is surely subject to pleasure and pain, and for one so dependent, there can be little happiness. Even learned persons, because they have bodies, enjoy no happiness, and even fools are not necessarily unhappy. Therefore, egotism on the part of both is simply vain. Even if they know how to win happiness and overcome misery, they surely have not been able to discover means of averting death. What happiness can wealth or any sense enjoyment bring to man when the nearness of death gives him no satisfaction, just as a victim being escorted to the place of execution cannot enjoy any pleasure? Like the worldly pleasures, the bliss of heaven, in the sense of svarga, is also vitiated by envy, jealousy, evanescence, and decay. There are many impediments in attaining to that bliss, and it is fruitless, like cultivation. In other words, that the fruit of one's labors is only temporary. You should also hear how one attains the region through successful performance of religious duties unbalked by interruptions. One who performs sacrifices in this world and propitiates the gods through them goes to heaven and enjoys their heavenly pleasures gained through his actions and feels happy like the deities. He assumes a beautiful form and flying on a celestial car earned through his meritorious deeds and surrounded by heavenly damsels and sung by heavenly singers, he goes about blissfully. But while merrily sporting with the celestial damsels and heavenly pleasances and flying on a celestial car adorned with small bells and whose speed is controlled by the will of the rider, he does not notice his impending fall. He enjoys heaven as long as his meritorious deeds bear fruit, but when his merit is exhausted, driven by time, though reluctant, he has to take birth in the lower regions. If a person associates with the wicked and delights in impiety or losing control over his senses, indulges in low worldly pleasures and becomes mean, avaricious, lustful, and oppressive to living creatures, and misled by the wicked, kills animals, ignoring religious sanction, and worships ghosts and goblins, he inevitably goes to Naraka and assumes bodies of low, ignorant creatures. Clothed in a body, man performs actions which result in misery. In consequence of those actions, he assumes another body, and thus living in the world, the mortal man enjoys little happiness. The regions of the universe and their rulers who live till the end of a kalpa are afraid of me. Even Brahma, who lives for 2 pararthas only, is afraid of me. The senses bring about actions, and the gunas prompt the senses to act, and the said jiva, being invested with bodies and senses and identifying itself with them, reaps the fruits of actions. So long as the diversity of the gunas prevails, the atma will appear manifold, and so long as the manifoldness of atma lasts, the dependent state will continue. So long as the state of dependence of the jiva continues, there is fear from the Lord. Therefore, those who take to these gunas get deluded and come to grief. Time, Atma, Shastra, the world, nature, and Dharma are the various names by which I am called when the equilibrium of the 3 qualities is disturbed or they are agitated. Uddhava said, O Lord, though associated with a body, etc., why should not the jiva be bound by actions begotten of body? Or, having no connection with them, how does the soul get tied to them? How does a person liberated or bound behave or sport, and by what characteristics is he to be known as one or the other, liberated or bound? How does he eat, ease nature, sleep, sit, or walk? O Achyuta, the foremost of those expert in answering questions, answer this question. My mistaken notion is as to whether the same Atma is both ever bound and ever liberated. Thus ends the 10th discourse, forming part of the dialogue between the Lord and Uddhava in Book 11 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahamsa Samhita. Discourse 11, the characteristics of bound and liberated souls, as well as of devotees, which are to an extent a third category, or a subset of liberated, I suppose. The glorious Lord began again. The characterization of a jiva as bound or emancipated is determined by its being subject or not to the gunas controlled by me, and has nothing to do with the jiva's essential nature. And the gunas being rooted in Maya, there is neither emancipation nor bondage for me. As dream is an illusory aspect of the mind, grief and infatuation, joy and sorrow and embodiment are falsely attributed to the self. Hence, even transmigration of the soul is not real, but is ascribed to it through ignorance. Knowing that saving knowledge and ignorance are my potencies, specially brought into being by my Maya, and have existed without beginning, and make for release and bondage, O Uddhava, though I am one, O highly intelligent one, it is in relation to the jiva alone, a reflection of mine, that bondage has existed from time immemorial through ignorance, and it is in relation to the jiva alone that the other state of release is brought about through knowledge. Next, I shall tell you the distinction between the one in bondage and the other who is liberated, characterized by contrary properties, though existing in one and the same individual, O dear Uddhava. The two are like a pair of birds, kindred, and settled as companions in the same nest on the tree by force of Maya. One of them partakes of the fruit in the peepal tree of the body, while the other, though going without food, is superior in strength. The enlightened one who does not partake of the fruit of the peepal tree knows himself as well as the other, but not so the one who partakes of the fruit of the peepal tree. Again, the one who is characterized by ignorance has been in bondage from eternity, while he who is all knowledge is ever free. An enlightened soul is not tied to the body, even though he remains in the body by force of his past sanskaras, any more than one who has awakened from a dream remains tied to the dream body. A man of perverted intellect remains identified with his body, though not confined within it, as one who is seeing a dream is identified with his dream body, though not actually present in it, because the dream body is not actually present anywhere. It is not real. Remaining unaffected while the objects of sense, which are no other than modifications of the three gunas, are being apprehended by the senses, which are themselves modifications of the same gunas, he who is enlightened does not feel that he is apprehending them. On the other hand, he feels that it is the gunas themselves, in the form of senses, that apprehend their own objects. Functioning in this body, controlled by his prarabdha, the ignorant jiva, however, remains tied to it through the egotistic notion that he is the agent, as a result of actions which are actually being performed by the indriyas, by the senses themselves. Thus remaining free from passion while in bed, sitting, moving about, bathing, seeing, touching, smelling, eating, and hearing, etc., and allowing the gunas to enjoy the various objects of the senses, the enlightened soul does not get bound like the ignorant man. Though continuing in his psychophysical organism, which is a modification of prakriti, he remains unattached to it, like the sky, the sun, or the wind. With his doubts resolved by his penetrating intellect, whetted by detachment, he turns away from the sense of diversity, even as one who has woken up from a dream turns away from it. He whose vital, organic, mental, and intellectual functions are absolutely free from deliberate thought remains, as a matter of fact, altogether unfettered by the three gunas operating through his body, though dwelling in it. A wise man is he who is not affected when his body is tormented by mischievous persons, or by chance treated somewhat with honor by someone at some place. The sage who has transcended good and evil and sees equality everywhere would neither praise those that do or say good, nor censure those who do or say evil. Reveling in his self, a man given to contemplation should neither do nor contemplate nor speak anything, good or evil, and should roam about like a stupid fellow and live in the aforesaid manner. If one, though well versed in the Veda, has not attained perfection in the knowledge of the Supreme Brahman, his labor has ended in labor alone, like that of a man who tends a dry cow. The man who maintains a cow that has been milked for good, meaning that will produce no more milk, a false wife, a body depending on another, and an unworthy son, who guards wealth which is not bestowed on worthy recipients, and cultivates, O dear Uddhava, speech which does not glorify me, reaps misery after misery. A wise man ought not to cultivate such barren speech as does not glorify, O dear Uddhava, my purifying activity responsible for the appearance, continuance, and extinction of this universe, and does not describe my advent of Sri Rama, Sri Krishna, and so on, which is so dear to the world, among my avataranas taken for the sake of Leela. Having cast aside, through inquiry on the lines indicated in the foregoing verses, the mistaken notion of diversity with respect to the soul, and focused one's mind, free from impurities, on me, the omnipresent Lord, one should retire. If you are unable to fix your mind irrevocably on Brahman, do all your duties efficiently in a disinterested spirit for my sake. Hearing with reverence my stories, which bring merit and purify the worlds, chanting them and constantly recalling them, arranging dramatic representation of my advent and leelas again and again, pursuing righteousness, enjoyment, and wealth for my sake, and depending on me, O Uddhava, one develops unflinching devotion to me, the eternal. Equipped with devotion, acquired through the fellowship of saints, he becomes my worshipper. Such a worshipper undoubtedly attains with ease to my state, as shown by the righteous. Uddhava submitted. What kind of man is considered by you to be a pious soul, O illustrious Lord? And what kind of devotion has been esteemed by the righteous and may be directed towards you? Let this be pointed out to me, bent low, devoted and fallen at your feet, O ruler of Brahma and others, the controller of the spheres, the lord of the creation. You are the supreme Brahman, taintless like the sky, the spirit beyond the Prakriti. Yet, O Lord, you have descended, having assumed a distinct personality at your own will. The glorious Lord replied, a pious soul is compassionate to all embodied souls, harms none, is forbearing, has truthfulness for his strength, is faultless of mind, equipoised and beneficent to all. His judgment is never clouded by the pleasures of sense. He is self-disciplined, soft, pure, resourceless and effortless, lives on a scanty meal, is free from passions and constant, solely depends on me and is given to contemplation and vigilant, remains unexcited and firm. He must have conquered the 6 waves. The 6 waves are cold, heat, greed, infatuation, hunger, and thirst. In other words, none of these things must be able to upset his inner mental equanimity. Does not seek honor, though bestowing it, is capable of imparting knowledge to others, sincere, altruistic, and possessed of right knowledge. He is the best of virtuous men who, having completely neglected all his duties, though prescribed by me, while knowing full well the virtues and sins, worships me alone. They are considered by me to be the foremost of devotees who worship me with exclusive devotion, meaning who do nothing else but worship me, knowing in reality how great I am, and what like I am, or not knowing this. They are still the greatest, the foremost of devotees if they perform worship even in absence of knowledge. Devotion to me consists, O Uddhava, in beholding, touching, and worshiping my representations in the form of images, etc., and also beholding, touching, and worshiping people devoted to me, rendering service to them, extolling them, bowing to them, and repeatedly recounting my excellences and exploits, developing reverence for hearing my stories, practicing contemplation on me, offering all one's gains to me, offering one's body for service, narrating the stories of my advent and recounting my deeds, celebrating festivals connected with me, such as the Janmashtami festival, and conducting festivities in my temples with vocal and instrumental music, dance, and Puranic discourses, visiting holy places in procession, and conducting worship with flowers, etc., on all annual festive occasions, initiating men into certain forms of Vedic and Tantrika worship, etc., and undertaking vows sacred to me. Enthusiasm in installing my images in temples specially built for the purpose, and individual as well as collective effort for laying out gardens, orchards, and pleasances, erecting boundary walls around towns and constructing temples, keeping my temples tidy and clean after the manner of a servant by removing their dust and plastering their floor with cow dung, etc. This is assuming an earthen floor. Washing their floor and decorating it with ornamental designs and diagrams in a guileless way. In a guileless way means like not because you're being paid to do it or something like that. Absence of pride and hypocrisy and refraining from making known one's own services. One should not use even the light of a lamp offered to me. One should offer. So, in other words, one should not make an offering. The best offerings are is that not being used actually for some selfish purpose. Like if you have a lamp that you're planning to use for yourself, to offer the lamp and then take it back and go on using it is a less true offering than an offering made purely for the sake of as an offering. One should offer to me whatever is most favored with the world, as well as whatever is most liked by himself, for such an offering is capable of yielding immortality. The sun, fire, the Brahmana, cows, a votary of Lord Vishnu, the sky, the air, water, earth, one's own body, and all living beings are the media of my worship, O good one. In other words, you may worship any of those things as me. In the sun, one should worship me by hymns forming part of the three Vedas. In fire, by oblations, and a worthy Brahmana through hospitality, of course, and in cows through green grass, etc. O dear Uddhava, in a votary of Lord Vishnu, one should worship me through attentions due to a relation. In other words, treating them the way you would treat a family member, because all devotees of Lord Vishnu are a family. In the cavity of one's heart, one should worship me through fixity in meditation. In the air, one should worship me through the thought that it is the life-giving principle running through the entire universe. In the water, one should worship me through articles of worship followed by water itself. In a raised ground, leveled and cleared by means of mystic formulas. In one's own body, one should propitiate the soul through amenities. And in all created beings, one should worship me as the conscious self through undifferentiated vision. Through these media, one should contemplate and worship with a concentrated mind in the aforesaid manner my serene and four-armed personality equipped with a conch, discus, mace, and lotus. He who worships me as aforesaid with a concentrated mind, through sacrifices and acts of pious liberality, attains true devotion to me, and through service to the righteous, follows my remembrance. Ordinarily, there is no royal road other than the discipline of devotion preceded by association with the righteous, O Uddhava, for I am the greatest resort of the righteous. Therefore, hear this sovereign secret, O scion of Yadu. I shall tell you even that which deserves to be scrupulously guarded, for you are my servant and sincere friend. Thus ends the 11th discourse in Book 11 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 12, the glory of satsanga, and also how to perform one's prescribed duty and how to relinquish it. The glorious Lord began again. Neither yoga nor sankhya, nor righteousness, study of the Vedas, or japa of the divine name, austerity and renunciation, nor pouring oblations into the sacred fire and works of public utility, such as the digging of wells and tanks and the laying out of gardens, nor the bestowal of gifts, the observance of fasts, the worship of gods, muttering secret spells, resorting to holy waters and places of pilgrimage, undertaking sacred observances such as purity of body and mind, and the 5 forms of self-abnegation, gain me over, as does satsanga capture me. Satsanga, which actually puts an end to all attachments. For thanks to the fellowship of saints, a number of daityas, yatudhanas, beasts and birds, gandharvas and apsaras, nagas, siddhas, charanas and guhyakas, vidyadharas, and among human beings, vaishyas and shudras, women folk and the lowest born, possessed of a rajasika and tamasika disposition, such as Vratasura, Prahlada son of Kayadhu, Vrashaparva, Bali, Bana, Maya, and Vibhishana, subhuman beings like Sugriva, Hanuman, Jambavan, the elephant, Gajendra, Jatayu, Tuladhara, Dharmavyadha, who was a hunter, Kubja, the gopis, as well as the wives of Brahmanas, of Raja, and others, ascended to my realm in different yugas, O sinless Uddhava. Although they had never studied the Sruti texts, had never waited upon the most exalted ones, had not observed any sacred vows, nor practiced any austerities, they attained to me through the fellowship of saints. Through mere love, indeed, the gopis and cows, the trees and antelopes, cobras and other dull-witted creatures accomplished the object of their life and easily attained to me, whom one cannot reach with exertion through yoga or sankhya, liberality, sacred vows, austerities, and sacrificial performances, exposition of sacred texts, study of the Vedas, japa of the divine name, and renunciation. When I was taken to Mathura along with Balarama by Akrura, the son of Svapalka, the gopis, whose mind was attached to me through intense devotion, and who suffered acute pangs of separation from me, did not look upon anyone else than me as a source of delight. Those very autumnal nights of ineffable sweetness, which had during the Rasa Leela been spent like half a second with me, the highest object of their love when I was present by their side in the woods of Vrindavana, hung heavy on them like a kalpa, now that they were bereft of me, O loved one. With their mind fastened onto me with cords of love, they were no longer conscious of their own people or even of their own self, much less of this world or the next, any more than sages lost in yogic trance are conscious of names and forms, and merged into me like rivers that lose themselves in the waters of the ocean. Full of passion for me, thinking me as their lover, their paramour, women in their hundreds and thousands who did not know my essential divine character attained to me, the supreme Brahman, through the fellowship of the righteous. Therefore, turning your back upon injunctions as well as upon interdictions, renouncing worldly activity as well as renouncing even cessation from activity, and rejecting that which has been learnt and that which has yet to be learnt, O Uddhava, seek as your refuge me alone, the one self of all embodied creatures with all your being, for with me alone you can be rid of fear from all quarters. Uddhava submitted. Even though I am hearing your discourse, O Lord of Masters of Yoga, the doubt in my mind does not cease, so that my mind stands bewildered. The glorious Lord replied, the aforesaid Supreme is self-evident in that he reveals himself in the chakras. Having first entered the Adhara chakra, which is often extended to the Muladhara chakra, located near the anus, along with the sonant prana known by the name of para speech, and assumed the subtle forms composed of the mind stuff and known by the names of Pashyanti and Madhyama in the Manipura and Vishuddhi chakras located near the navel and in the throat, respectively. He finally manifests himself within the mouth in the grossest form, known by the name of Vaikhari speech and consisting of matra, which is the measure of time taken in uttering a vowel sound, whether short or long, accent, udatta, etc., and articulate sound. Just as fire, existing in the form of heat in the sky, appears in a minute form when being repeatedly churned with force out of a block of wood, and growing larger blazes forth with the help of oblations, even so I appear by degrees, as a matter of fact, as the para, pashyanti, madhyama, and vaikhari forms of this Vedic speech within the body. Likewise, articulation, work done by the hands, locomotion, evacuation of the bowels and the bladder, perceiving smell and taste, vision, perceiving the touch, and audition, meaning the sense of hearing, conception, cognition, and intellection, and self-identification with the body, etc., permeating things, and the entire range of objective existence are my manifestations. This God is indeed one and unmanifest, for he is the first to become the support of the three gunas and the source of the lotus of the universe. Having by force of time purposefully embraced his potency, he appears manifold, as it were, as having found a suitable soil, seeds assume diverse shapes in the form of trees, etc. This universe is in no way other than God, in whom it stands woven warp and woof like a piece of cloth, which owes its existence to the expanse of the threads. Just as threads exist, even independently of the cloth, as in you could tear the cloth apart and there would be no more cloth, but you'd still have a bunch of threads. But the cloth does not exist independently of the threads. So the universe owes its existence to God, but God exists, universe or no. This tree of mundane existence has no beginning, is characterized by activity and puts forth flowers and fruits in the shape of enjoyment and final moksha. 2 are its seeds, papa and punya. Innumerable are its roots in the shape of cravings that give rise to it. 3 are its stalks, the gunas. 5 are its main boughs, the elements. It yields 5 saps in the shape of the 5 objects of the senses. 10 and 1 are its secondary branches, the 10 indriyas and the mind. It bears the nest of 2 birds, the jivatma and the paramatma. 3 are the layers of its bark in the shape of vata, pitta, and kapha, which comprise the physical body. It bears 2 fruits, joy and suffering, and spreads as far as the sphere of the sun. Full of carnal desires, men of the world partake of its one fruit, misery, while the swan-like men of wisdom dwelling in the woods eat the other, the bliss of immortality. He alone knows the Vedas, who comes to realize, through gurus, the one God appearing in multitudinous forms by dint of his Maya. Having thus subdued yourself and remaining alert all the while, cut at the root of your astral body, with exclusive devotion acquired by sitting at the feet of a guru, or by means of the keen-edged axe of wisdom. And having realized the self, cast off forthwith even the weapon with which you have rent the veil of ignorance. Thus ends the 12th discourse in Book 11 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 13, the teaching imparted by the Lord in the form of the divine swan to the sage Sanaka and his 3 brothers. The glorious Lord began again. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. These are the modes of buddhi and not of the self. By the quality of sattva, one should control the other 2, and sattva itself by sattva. As a result of sattva grown predominant, appears in man the virtue bearing the label of devotion to me. Sattva develops through the use of sattvika things, and thence proceeds righteousness. Righteousness, which contributes to the predominance of sattva and which is the superlative virtue, curbs rajas and tamas, and when both these are subdued, unrighteousness, which has its root in these latter, soon disappears as a matter of course. Scripture, water, environment, surroundings, time, occupation, and birth, the object of contemplation, mantra, and purificatory rites, these 10 are contributory to the growth of a particular guna, depending on which scripture you follow, what type of water you drink, what environment you're in, what people you're around, what occupation you work in, what you contemplate on, what mantras or spells you practice, what rites you do, etc. Of these latter, whatever men of mature judgment speak approvingly of is unquestionably sattvika. That which they condemn is tamasika, and that which is looked upon by them with indifference is rajasika. For the predominance of sattva, a man should make use of sattvika things alone. Thence will proceed righteousness, and thence will follow wisdom, culminating in self-realization and the extinction of darkness. The fires produced by the attrition of bamboo stalks subsides after consuming that thicket. So the body born of unevenness of the gunas and behaving like the fire ceases to be. Uddhava submitted. Men generally know the pleasures of sense to be the source of calamities. How is it that, like the dog, the donkey, and the goat, they still doggedly pursue and enjoy them, O Krishna? The glorious Lord replied, the perverted notion of I, with reference to the body, duly springs up in the heart of the deluded soul. Due to such notion, rajas, which is the root of sorrow, pervades the mind, even though the mind is born of sattva. In the mind, colored with rajas, of a man of perverted judgment, springs up, first of all, the notion about an object being worth enjoying, and then as to how it can be enjoyed. Next arises in him, as a result of his dwelling on the excellent aspects of that object, a passion for it, which is indeed difficult to arrest. Having no control over his senses, and overpowered by desire, the man embarks upon actions, attenuated with sorrow, even though clearly perceiving them to be such, deluded as he is by the impetuosity of rajas. The man of discrimination, though his mind too is distracted by rajas and tamas, collects his mind again with effort, alive as he is to the evil inherent in the pleasures of sense, and does not get attached to them. Having controlled the breath and secured steadiness of posture, and remaining alert and not feeling bored, in the event of success not coming soon, one should slowly compose the mind, concentrating it on me at the appointed time thrice a day. Withdrawing the mind from everything else, it should be duly and directly established in me. This much comprises the yoga taught to Brahma, accompanied by my disciples, the sages Sanaka and others. Uddhava submitted, I wish to know about that form in which and when you taught the yoga to Sanaka and his three brothers, O Krishna. The glorious Lord replied, Sanaka and his brothers, mind-born sons of Brahma the Creator, questioned their father about the unfailing and highest consummation of yoga, so difficult to understand. Sanaka and the others submitted, the mind clings to the sense objects, and the latter get imprinted on the mind. O Lord, how can it be possible for the seeker of liberation who is keen to reach the other shore to part them one from the other? Thus interrogated, Brahma, the great god, self-born creator of beings, could not get, in spite of his deep thought, at the root of the question, his mind being preoccupied with his duty of creation. So the said god fixed his mind on me, with intent to get to the other side of the question. Then I sought his presence in the form of a hansa, swan. Beholding me, and placing Brahma at their head, Sanaka and the others came up to me and, bowing at my feet, asked me who I was. In these words was I interrogated on the said occasion by the sages, keen as they were to know the truth. Hear from me, O Uddhava, what I spoke to them. If there is unity of the substance known as the self, how can such question on your part be relevant, O Brahmana sages? Or if I speak, what can be my basis? Your question as to who I am is indeed a drill in words and meaningless, the bodies of living creatures being identical, constituted of the five elements, and from the point of view of ultimate reality. Whatever is grasped by the mind, expressed through speech and perceived through the faculty of vision, nay, even with the other senses, is but myself. There is nothing other than me. Know this as a result of inquiry into the truth. The mind cleaves to the sense objects, and the latter get imprinted on the mind, O my sons. The self objects and the mind both constitute the body of the jiva, which is essentially the same as I. So that there is no real affinity between the jiva on the one hand and the sense objects and the mind on the other, which can therefore be easily transcended by the jiva by contemplating on its divine essence, its identity with Brahman. Becoming one with me, the jiva should give up both, the mind clinging to the sense objects as a result of repeatedly enjoying them, and the sense objects that get imprinted on it. Wakefulness, the dream state, and deep slumber are the states of the mind, following from the gunas. The jiva, however, is conclusively known to be distinct from them, as being their witness. Since this identification of the soul with buddhi attributes to it the functions of the gunas, therefore, getting established in me the transcendent Brahman, the jiva should shake off this identification. Thereafter follows the divorce of the sense objects and the mind. Realizing the bondage of the soul, occasioned by self-identification with one's psychophysical organism, to be the source of evil, evil being the obscuration of one's essentially blissful nature, and feeling disgusted with it, this bondage, one should get established in the fourth principle, the fourth state of transcendental consciousness beyond the three ordinary states of consciousness, and give up identification with the body, etc., and the resultant thought of gratifying the self. So long as the sense of reality of diverse objects does not disappear from the mind of man through arguments, the fool continues to sleep, even though he is awake, just like the man who is waking in a dream. Objective entities like the body other than the self having no existence, the difference is occasioned by them, like Varna, Ashrama, so on, the various destinies that they might reach and their causes, are unreal with the self as things seen by a dreaming man. He who, while waking, perceives outside himself, through all his senses, objects having properties changing every moment, who experiences within his heart in a dream things shaped by his vasanas or his cravings, and similar to those perceived in the waking state, and who in deep slumber withdraws them, is one and the same, connected as he is with all the states by memory as their witness and as the controller of the senses. Pondering thus and arriving at the following conclusion about the nature of the self, that the three states of the mind traceable to the gunas are superimposed on me by my deluding potency, cut at the root of egotism, the basis of all doubts, with the sword of wisdom whetted by reasoning, the precepts of saints and the Sruti texts, and betake yourselves to me, seated in your very heart. One should look upon this world as an illusion, and that it is a creation of the mind, open to perception and evanescent as a dream, and most unsteady like a revolving firebrand. Consciousness, though one, appears as many, and this threefold division wrought by the projection of the gunas is an illusory appearance. Diverting one's eye from the body, etc., one should remain absorbed in the realization of one's own blissful nature. His thirst for enjoyment having ceased, he should keep quiet and effortless. Even if this body, etc., is perceived as a distinct reality at times, what has been dismissed as unreal can no longer delude us, although its impression on the mind may continue till death. Nay, a man established in the self no longer cognizes his perishable body, by means of which he realized his self as risen or settled, gone out or come back by chance, any more than a mind blinded by intoxication caused by wine cognizes the garment worn by him as still on his person or fallen therefrom. The body, too, including the indriyas and the vital principle, functioning as it does under the control of providence, undoubtedly and invariably survives till the karma which brought it into existence stands. He who has climbed up to the highest ladder of yoga, known by the name of samadhi, and realized the truth, does not recapture the body along with the world, any more than the man who has awoken from sleep does his dream body. This is the secret of Sankhya and Yoga, which has been expounded by me to you, O Brahmana sages. Know me to be Yajna, arrived with intent to expound to you dharmas. I am the supreme goal of Yoga and Sankhya, virtue both in its ideal and practical form, glory and prosperity, celebrity and self-control, O jewels among the twice-born. All virtues, like even-mindedness and non-attachment, which are not products of the three gunas, find shelter in me, transcendent and free from desire as I am, the beloved friend, the self of all. Having worshipped me with supreme devotion, the sages Sanaka and his brothers, who had their doubts thus resolved by me, celebrated me through songs of praise. Honored with due ceremony and glorified at length by the aforesaid great sages, I flew back to my divine realm. Brahma looking on. Thus ends the 13th discourse in Book 11 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 14 is entitled Glory of the Path of Devotion and the Process of Meditation Described. Uddhava submitted. Exponents of Veda speak of many a course of discipline leading to final moksha, O Krishna. Does their importance vary according to the choice of the striver, or does prominence attach to one of them? The discipline of devotion, by recourse to which the mind, having shaken off attachment for all, gets fixed on you, has been declared by you as independent of other disciplines, my master. The glorious Lord replied, in course of time, this word bearing the name of Veda, in which stands described the course of conduct, helping one to fix one's mind on me, disappeared during the pralaya. At the beginning of the next creation, it was delivered by me to Brahma. By Brahma again, it was taught to his eldest son, Swayambhuva Manu, and the 7 great seers, the Saptarishis, associated with the creation of the universe, Bhrigu and the others, received it from Svayambhuva Manu. From them, the fathers of creation, their progeny, the Devas, the Danavas, and the Gohyakas, human beings, Siddhas and Gandharvas, including Vidyadharas and Charanas, as well as men of the other Dvipas, Kinnaras, Nagas, Rakshasas, Kimpurushas, and others partly received it. Others received it. Diverse are the natural tendencies of the aforementioned, born as they are of Raja, Sattva, and Tamas, due to which created beings and their thoughts differ, and in conformity with their nature, indeed, diverse interpretations of the Vedas flow from them all. In this way, what with diversity of disposition, and what with the oral teaching imparted from father to son, the minds of some men get perverted, while others embrace heretic views. With their judgment clouded by my deluding potency, a jewel among men, people speak of different ways to attain blessedness according to their own past karma and taste. Some declare it to be dharma, others call it renown, others name it as sexual enjoyment. Some designate it as truthfulness, control of the senses, and mind control. Others speak of wealth and power as their well-known end. Advocates of renunciation declare it as renunciation, while hedonists call it sensuous enjoyment. Some call it yajna, while others speak of it as austerity, liberality, sacred vows, observances, and the 5 forms of self-abnegation. The rewards of these are indeed such as have a beginning and an end, fruits as they are of endeavor. They bring sorrow in their train, culminate in ignorance, afford trivial delight, and are attended with grief. How could that happiness fall to the lot of those who have set their mind on sense delights, the happiness which is enjoyed with me as his self, O noble one, by him who has fixed his mind on me and expects no gratification from any source? All the quarters are full of joy to him who has nothing to call his own, has subdued his senses and mind, whose mind is equipoised and fully gratified with me. He who has bestowed his mind on me no more aspires for the position of Brahma, much less for the realm of the great Indra, still less for the sovereignty over the entire globe, rulership of the subterranean worlds, or mystic powers acquired through the practice of yoga. Nor does he seek even final moksha, cessation of rebirth for all time to come, divorced from me. Neither Brahma, my own son, nor Lord Shiva, who is my own self, nor again Lord Balarama, my own elder brother, nor Goddess Sri, my better half, nor my own divine personality, is so very dear to me as you. I ever dog the footsteps of him who is free from expectation, is given to contemplation on me, composed, free from animosity, and sees unity everywhere, in order that I may be cleansed, absolved from the stigma of not being able to repay my debt to him by the dust of his feet that is sure to fall on my person if I so dog his footsteps. Others cannot realize my all-blissful character, which is apprehended by those exalted souls who have nothing to call their own, whose mind is devoted to me, who have subdued their passions and are fond of all living beings, and whose understanding is unclouded by desires. This character of mine can be known only by those who are free from wants. Though attracted by objects of senses, my devotee, who has not been able to conquer his senses, is not generally overpowered by objects, thanks to his powerful devotion. As fire which has fully burst into flames reduces a pile of firewood to ashes, so does devotion directed towards me, whatever its origin, burn one's sins in toto, O Udbhava. Neither yoga, nor sankhya, nor righteousness, nor study of the Vedas, or japa of the divine name, austerity or renunciation captivates me so thoroughly as does intense devotion. I, the beloved self of the righteous, can be captured through exclusive devotion coupled with reverence. Devotion concentrated on me absolves even the pariahs from the stigma attaching to their birth. Piety accompanied by veracity and compassion, or learning coupled with ascesis, indeed does not thoroughly and once for all cleanse a mind destitute of devotion. How can devotion be known except through the hair standing on end, or through one's heart melting, or through tears of joy trickling down one's cheeks? And how can one's mind be purified except through devotion? A man full of devotion to me, who speaks in a voice choked with emotion, whose heart melts through affection, who weeps incessantly at the thought of his separation from me, and sometimes laughed when reminded of the inwardness of my leelas, who sings unabashed at the top of his voice and dances out of joy, purifies the world. As gold sheds its dross and regains its purity when heated with fire, so does the soul shake off the seeds of karma through the discipline of devotion, and forthwith attains oneness with me. The more one's mind gets purified by listening to and recounting my auspicious stories, the better able is the jiva to discern the subtle reality of the self, even as the eye is better able to perceive a minute object when treated with a medicated pigment. The mind of a man dwelling on the objects of sense gets attached to them. The mind of one contemplating on me gets absorbed in me alone. Giving up the thought of the unreal and worthless objects of the world as things seen in a dream or fancied, concentrate your mind, purified through devotion to me, on me. Abandoning from a distance the company of women as well as of men, delighting in the company of women, and having conquered one's mind, one should sit down in a secure and lonely place and unweariedly think of me. In the case of such a man, no such affliction and no such bondage results from attachment to others as does from the company of women as well as of men delighting in the company of women. Uddhava submitted, "Be pleased to tell me, O Lord, with lotus-like eyes, the process of meditation indicated, so the specific process of meditation indicated in the foregoing verses as to how and what form and as what a seeker of liberation should contemplate on you." The glorious Lord replied, "Seated on a seat of moderate height, neither very high nor very low, with his body erect in a comfortable posture, placing both his hands palm upwards on his lap, and steadying his gaze on the tip of his nose." The steadying his gaze on the tip of his nose, placing the drishti on the tip of the nose, is a very common instruction in ancient texts of yoga with different interpretations. Some yogis do indeed look cross-eyed at the tip of their nose like this, but often sages interpret, in the Sanskrit, it doesn't literally say tip of the nose, it says end of the nose. Many interpret it to be the inward end, the root of the nose, meaning the spot within between the eyebrows, and that it's referring to concentrating one's internal drishti on the seat of the Agnya chakra. So that's another common interpretation of what is meant by steadying the gaze on the tip of the nose. And having fully controlled his senses, one should cleanse the passages of the life breath by the three processes of pranayama: puraka, slow inhalation; kumbhaka, retention of breath. So you inhale for a while, then you stop inhaling and just retain the breath inside your lungs; and rechaka, slow exhalation. And should slowly practice this course in the reverse order, meaning when you did rechaka, then you do kumbhaka again. You wait a while before inhaling slowly again. Manifesting in mind through the instrumentality of the life breath the sound of pranava, the sacred syllable om, as extending uninterruptedly, fine as a fiber of the lotus stalk, from the Muladhara located near the anus up to the crown of the head. One should then follow it with a sharp nasal sound, continuous as the ringing of a bell. In this way, he should exercise his breath, joining his breath with pranava, with the om sound, thrice a day, 10 times each. Within a month, he will have attained control over his breath. Visualizing the heart, existing within the body in the shape of a lotus bud turned upside down, with its stalk upwards, like the flower of a plantain, in an inverted position with 8 open petals and pericarp turned upwards. He should picture to his mind in succession the sun, the moon, and fire as existing in the form of 3 circles on the pericarp of this inner lotus. In the center of fire, he should mentally behold my form, as depicted hereafter, so happy to contemplate upon. He should conceive it as symmetrical, gracious, having a charming countenance, with 4 long, beautiful arms, a most shapely and graceful neck, lovely cheeks and bright smiles, with brilliant crocodile-shaped earrings adorning well-matched ears, clad in golden raiment, dark as a cloud, bearing on the right and left sides, respectively, of the chest, the marks of Srivatsa and Sri, decked with a conch, discus, mace, and lotus and a wreath of sylvan flowers, feet shining with anklets, distinguished by the effulgence of the Kaustupa gem, graced all over with the glorious diadem, wristlets, girdle, and armlets, charming of every limb, pleasing to the heart, with a countenance and eyes enlivened with grace and very soft to the touch. And he should contemplate the mind on each limb individually, in turn, withdrawing the senses from their objects with the help of the mind, and weaning the said mind from all objects with the help of the intellect. The driver of the chariot of the body, a wise man should focus it on me, gathering that mind which takes in the entire personality of the Lord. He should learn to concentrate it on one member alone, rather than on the entire image all at the same time. He should think no more of the other limbs, and should fix his thought exclusively on the Lord's face, wearing a winsome smile. Diverting the mind, once it has gained its firm hold on my countenance, he should fix it on my all-pervading self, the substratum of all, and unattached to all, like the sky, and transcending that too, and becoming one with me, the absolute. He should think to cease of anything else, not even of the distinction between subject and object. With his intellect thus established in me, he sees me in himself, and himself actually merged in me, the universal soul, like an individual light in the element of fire. The misconception regarding matter in the form of the body, etc., being his own self, knowledge in the form of ascribing knowership to the self, and action in the form of attributing activity to the self, will soon disappear from the mind of the striver, who concentrates his mind through most intense meditation, as aforesaid. Thus ends the 14th discourse in Book 11 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. And I think that's probably a good point to stop. It's close to 10 o'clock, and that kind of ends that particular course of sadhana described in the Uddhava Gita. Next gets into talking about siddhis and other subjects. So I think we can start with that next time.
Awesome. Thanks, Devala.
Thank you guys very much for coming.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.